I've been covering the ending to Shadow of the Erdtree quite a bit here on this channel. From a critical, analytical, and lore perspective, there's just so much to discuss about it. One of my favorite things about the discourse around the topic is the diversity of opinions on what exactly happened between Miquella and Radahn. Take a look back at the comments on any video where I've discussed the supposed vow between the two demigods, and you'll find such a wide variety of opinions and theories. Comments about how there's no way Radahn would have ever agreed to become Miquella's consort are followed by comments arguing that it's obvious that he did. As I've said elsewhere, I'm not the biggest fan of what FromSoftware did here, but I do think it's awesome that they've created a story that can be interpreted in so many different ways. And the more I think about it, the more I talk about this ending with fellow fans and hear everyone's takes on it, the more I'm reminded of the Rashomon Effect. And when you combine this noteworthy narrative technique with Miyazaki's design priorities, the more I'm beginning to believe that an evolution of the Rashomon Effect, a FromSoftware-styled interpretation of it, is exactly what they were aiming for with the ending to Shadow of the Erdtree. So, what is the Rashomon Effect? The Rashomon Effect is a storytelling technique where a single event is witnessed by several different characters, and each one comes away from said event with a different interpretation of what happened. The term is a reference to the 1950s mystery film Rashomon by Akira Kurosawa, where the murder of a samurai is described by 4 different witnesses. All 4 provide very different accounts of the murder, with each one trying to make themselves sound like the most honest and trustworthy person, like their interpretation of the event is what really happened. A modern film that tried to do this is, surprisingly, probably the most divisive movie of all time, The Last Jedi. I'm not here to relitigate that much maligned chapter of the Star Wars series. If you hated it, cool. If you loved it, no problem. But I bring it up here because the story of Luke and Kylo Ren's falling out was a pretty clear attempt at bringing the Rashomon Effect to a galaxy far, far away. And if you haven't seen Rashomon, then there's a good chance you probably have seen, or at least are familiar with, The Last Jedi. What the Rashomon Effect tries to get at, from a narrative perspective, is the idea that memories are subjective. As time goes on, our interpretation of past events is colored by a variety of factors, including our present experiences, our ever-evolving feelings towards the other parties involved, the fact that it's human nature to forget more than we'll ever remember, and the reality that in our own heads, we're always the main character, at the center of the story, and the party most triumphant or most offended. And that's what I think FromSoftware is getting at here. But rather than a traditional take on the Rashomon Effect, it's an evolution of it, a meta, immersive interpretation of this powerful storytelling technique. One that invites us to consider the evidence available to us, what we know about the characters involved from the base game, and combine all of that with our personal biases and opinions until we have an explanation for this plot twist that makes sense to us. Because we know what Miquella thought about the vow. He saw in Radahn a lord, and wished that he would someday be his consort. We know what Malenia thought. She certainly seems to think that the Red Lion agreed. We'll probably never know what Radahn himself thought. But in the absence of his opinion, the developers have given us the opportunity to come up with our own. And FromSoftware games, you are the main character. No matter how many times you get your ass kicked or die in stupid ways, in the Soulsborne games, you are the leading man. Not only do you get to choose between an Age of Fire or an Age of Dark, becoming the next Gearman or becoming an old one, or fucking off to the moon with Ronnie, or burning it all away, you have more freedom of interpretation than you have in most games. Miyazaki himself watches lore videos and enjoys seeing the various ways people piece his stories together, and his entire design philosophy was based on a time in his life when he only knew enough English to read fragments of fantasy novels, and thus had to develop his own answers about what happened in the sections he couldn't figure out. This dovetails nicely with the Rashomon Effect. The same way the experiences and preconceptions of the witnesses of a murder might influence the way they interpret what happened, so too has our 2 years in the lands between affected how we view Miquella's memory. Malenia's role in all this is often overlooked, but she's arguably the most polarizing character in Elden Ring. People have big opinions about her duel with Radahn, her use of the Scarlet Aeonian, and of course her boss fight. Anything involving her is sure to draw a significant reaction, and by throwing her into this situation, they had to know they were setting themselves up for controversy right from the get-go. But as for the other demigods, coming into the DLC, Miquella and Radahn were probably 2 of the most popular characters in the community. Miquella supporters are likely to watch the memory and believe that Radahn agreed willingly at every step of the way, or agreed at first and broke his promise at some point down the line. Radahn fans, on the other hand, are more inclined to think that he was compelled to become Miquella's consort, and at the end of Shadow of the Erdtree is just a puppet for the Empyrean. Folks like me, who enjoy the lore about both characters for different reasons, are just trying to make sense of it all. Art is so often about adding on to the foundations of those who came before us. With this vow, FromSoftware has given us an evolution of the Rashomon Effect, one applied to the uniquely interactive medium of video games. In a world of video game narratives that are so often spoon-fed to players or lack nuance, I think there's beauty in that. Elden Ring's lore is a lot less esoteric than other Soulsborne games. There's a clearer timeline, with questions that are far more pointed than the nebulous ones we so often asked about Dark Souls. And if this is the end of Elden Ring, at least for now, then what I think Miyazaki and company wanted to give us at the end of Shadow of the Erdtree was the lore debate to end all lore debates. A lore debate where all potential interpretations are colored by our prior experiences with Miquella, Malenia, and Radahn. A lore debate where the only true answer is the one you believe. As my main man Ezio once said,
"But it is our ability to choose whatever you think is true that makes us human."
As I hinted at earlier, I'm not the biggest fan of the twist itself. I wish FromSoftware had taken a different path here, and no, I'm not one of the folks who thinks that they should have just simply subbed in Godwin. But still, I can't help but appreciate the debate and the discourse they've given us with their own version of the Rashomon Effect. So to hell with what everyone else thinks. Keep arguing for what you believe happened here, the same way the characters of Rashomon did with the murder of the samurai, and say it with your chest. Because no matter how rooted in your own opinions and experiences your personal take might be, the fact that you have one at all is, at the end of the day, exactly what I think Miyazaki wanted. But just because Miyazaki and company want us to draw our own conclusions about the vow doesn't mean that we shouldn't consider all of the evidence available to us. And there are a few details in the memory that community members have brought to my attention that I do think are worthy of examination. So I hope you'll join me next time and do your best to set aside your biases and preconceived notions as we take a look at some contradictory evidence in the ending to Shadow of the Erdtree. Thanks for watching. Huge shout out to Farewelleon, Moonlapse Piano, and yepeLaugh, whose covers from the Elden Ring and Game of Thrones soundtracks I used for this video. To check out all 3 of these incredibly talented artists, just follow the links down below in the description box. Big shout out to all my silver and gold tier YouTube channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Corey Matson, Gustavo Balabi, Little Caesar, Reed, Pathonian, and Faith G, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time!